65,000 years ago, somewhere on the coast of what is now Indonesia, a group of humans stood at the edge of the water and looked out at nothing. Not nothing like a calm sea. Nothing like an open horizon with no land, no signal, no way to know if anything was on the other side at all. They had no compass, no map, no written record of anyone who had ever attempted what they were about to attempt. They had a raft, probably bamboo, probably lashed together with whatever they could find, and somewhere between 50 and 200 people who had decided that whatever was out there was worth dying for to reach. This is the story of the first humans to ever cross an open ocean. And nobody talks about it. At the time, sea levels were significantly lower than today because most of the world's water was locked in glaciers. Islands that are now separated were connected. The journey from mainland Asia to the islands of what is now Indonesia was possible on foot. But the continent of Australia was different. It had been isolated for 35 million years. Even at the lowest possible sea levels, even with every geographical advantage the Ice Age could offer, there was still a stretch of open ocean that could not be walked across, rafted across accidentally, or reached by following a coastline. It had to be crossed deliberately. Anyone who reached Australia 65,000 years ago did not drift there. They planned it. That detail matters more than almost anything else in human history. Every ocean crossing before the modern era was considered by experts to be accidental. Fishermen blown off course, survivors of storms landing somewhere unexpected. The Australia crossing destroys that assumption completely. The Wallace Line, the oceanic boundary that divides Asian fauna from Australian fauna, was never bridged by land. The animals on either side evolved in complete isolation from each other. The humans who reached Australia knew they were going somewhere new because no animal had ever crossed accidentally and colonized the continent. They were the first things with a mind to make that journey, and they made it on purpose. In 2017, archaeologist Chris Clarkson and his team published findings from a site in northern Australia called Majbeep. What they found beneath the earth had been sitting there for 65,000 years. Ochre, the red pigment that ancient humans had been using to mark their presence across Africa and Europe. Ground stone axes. The oldest ground-edge stone axes ever found anywhere in the world. Grinding stones for processing plant food. This was not a site where survivors washed ashore and barely held on. This was a fully equipped settlement. The people who arrived in Australia brought their technology with them. They came prepared. Think about what that means. To cross 90 to 100 kilometers of open ocean with no knowledge of what you would find, you have to want it badly enough to build the tools before you go. You pack for the destination before you know if the destination exists. The decision to leave was made, and made deliberately, and made with enough commitment that an entire community loaded everything they had onto something that had never been tested in open water, and pushed off from the shore. Some of them did not survive the crossing. The ones who did landed on a continent that had never once seen a human face. What met them there had no fear of people. The megafauna of ancient Australia had evolved for 35 million years without a single human predator. Diprotodon, a wombat the size of a hippopotamus. Procoptodon, a kangaroo 3 meters tall. Thylacoleo carnifex, a marsupial lion with the strongest bite force of any land mammal known to science. None of these animals had any reason to run. They had never needed to. The first humans in Australia walked into a continent where the wildlife had never learned what a human being was capable of, and where nothing looked like anything they had ever seen. Every animal, every plant, every landscape feature was completely new. They had no name for any of it. They had arrived somewhere that existed in no story anyone had ever told. And they stayed. They built fires and told stories and buried their dead with ochre and made their marks on rock walls and raised children who 65,000 years later are still there. The Aboriginal Australians are the oldest continuous civilization on Earth. Not the oldest written civilization. Not the oldest agricultural civilization. The oldest. The direct, unbroken descendants of the people who stood on that coast in Indonesia and decided to cross. Their stories, their songlines, their astronomical knowledge encoded in oral traditions older than any monument on Earth. All of it began with someone who built a raft and pointed it at the horizon. Nobody sent them. Nobody funded the journey. Nobody came back to tell them it was safe. They had watched birds fly in from a direction where no land should have been. They had seen driftwood and unfamiliar seeds washing in on certain currents. They had decided that was enough to go on. And they went. In an age when there was no concept of exploration as a virtue, no culture that celebrated discovery, no reward waiting on the other side, they went anyway. Because the impulse that makes a human look at the edge of the known world and feel something other than fear is not a modern invention. It was there 65,000 years ago on a bamboo raft in the middle of the ocean. It has never left. Every ship that ever crossed the Atlantic, every satellite ever put in orbit, every person who ever moved to a city they'd never been to because something told them there was more there than where they started, all of it traces back to the same original decision. Made in silence. Made without certainty. Made on a coast in what is now Indonesia by people whose names are gone, whose faces are gone, whose language is gone. What is not gone is what they built on the other side. It is still there. It never stopped.